it's important, you gotta sometimes make the wrong choice to get to learn about what's the right one. So redefine to me means we have defined ourselves over the last few years with a certain sound, especially with progressive and maybe with a little bit more groovy records in between. But how do we evolve? That was the question for me that I've been, crossing my mind for a couple of months now, and that's why I think Redefined is such a good name for the position I'm in right now. I have a sound, and people know me from a sound, and we're evolving to a new sound. At the same time, we're not abandoning any sounds. So Redefine is just about we're gonna like rediscover ourselves. And for me, that means I'm gonna be triggered by other artists. I'm gonna be triggered by, you name it. Maybe it's you that made me realize, okay, maybe I can try something like this. And maybe it's a conversation you're having with a passenger on the plane. It can be anything. So Redefine was the best possible name and concept for me to continue my career. In the very beginning, when I just started out as a producer, I didn't even consider myself producer, to be honest. Um, I was just a DJ. Well, I kind of, if I think about it, in the weekends, I was really lucky to get close to the DJ, but I actually had to bring back empty glasses, and to hang jackets for people in a place called Scoop in Elst. Um, it was more like a bar dancing, but that really gave me inspiration to grow towards that DJ spot. And I remember that the local DJ there didn't want to have me play and perform because it was his spot. But the reason why I wanted to DJ because at home I was working on my first tracks. They were not even, well, named tracks, I think. It was just pieces of audio. I had no idea what I was doing. There was no YouTube, there was no education service, there was nothing that you can really find about making music. So it was really trial and error. I started out with my first setup. It was called Behringer MS-10, I think, or MS-20. Really small speakers, actually made for broadcast audio. And I got it really cheap because I worked at this place called Heuf. It's like audio service rental, and they gave me the opportunity to get those speakers for a really low fee. But yeah, that's how I started. And I started with Fruity Loops, and then I tried Cubase, and then after a while I visited a guy called Brian Dalton, a really good producer, and he worked with Logic. And that gave me the first, like, okay, if I want to make high quality music, that's what I thought, I have to use Logic. Of course, it's not truth because Fruity Loops and all that is good enough to make music. Look at Martin Garrix, look at Afrojack, they do a really good job. Avicii, they were all using Fruity Loops. That I discovered later. And my big inspiration was Fedde Le Grand and Tiesto back then. I was like, whenever I heard Let Me Think About It or Output His Track or Back and Forth, that really inspired me to make my first tracks. A little bit later, I discovered a Dutch guy, and his name was Gregor Salto. He had his own label called G-Rex, and he made really dancey, groovy stuff. He played a lot of shows in Holland on, they were called sneakers, more of a trendy kind of festival, mini festival. And I started going to those places to get inspiration from what's hot right now. And I heard guys like Ricky Rivaro play. I heard Chris Lake play. I heard Buggy Begovic, Hartwell. They were already up there. Hartwell was the highest. He was already playing the A game in Holland back then. And I was really happy to see him live and to get inspiration. And then after a while, he started noticing my tracks, and I put out a record on his label, Revealed, a track called Switched. And it's funny because we all got inspired by each other. And as soon as I got picked up by Fedde Le Grand with the track My Friend, Hartwell started playing out my tracks, putting it out on his label. I had support of other local guys in Holland, DJ Jean, for example. He started playing my tracks, and I remixed a song of his, and it was called Play That Beat. And because of DJ Jean, I got in touch with John Christian. And John Christian back then named a whole different name, But his real name is John Dearna. He gave me the opportunity to work in his studio, and that's how I got into more the technical side of DJing. So there were so many things going on in the same maybe 2-3 years, 2008 to 2011. And then when I started working in White Villa Studios, that was the moment when I started doing tracks like Legacy, like Home, Toulouse, and really laid down the fundament of the career that I have now. I think if you look back at my older records, the most signature sound that I had was probably the kick drum. I don't know why that is, but people started asking me, "Can you send me your kick drum?" And obviously, back then, the kick drum was a really important piece. There was no splice, there was no real good sample packs, there was no YouTube to kind of look how you make your own kick drum. So I found this kick drum and I used it in so many different projects. Um, so I really think that that was the first instrument, as small as it is, that really defined my sound. Um, at the same time, the Swedish House Mafia had the same thing. They had this kick drum they used in every record, and then the whole music industry started using that particular kick drum until it showed up in a sample pack. So I think it's a good thing if you contribute a little bit to the music industry, even though it's a small little thing like a kick, which to producers is a huge thing. The whole track can be built around a good kick. Um, and that was also the reason why I started developing a plugin, with Sonic Academy called Kick, because it was such an important thing. And the same goes for Sidechain with Kickstart. Those were the two things that really stood by my side for a long time and that were part of my identity and maybe still are. I think it's a good moment to kind of browse through some older projects to see how those records came about. I, for example, have the Flash remix here. I got sent the stems for Green Velvet, and I was used to like a lot of vocals, to melody, the vocals that were sung perfectly, and then I got these parts, and I was like, Eric, I don't know what you sent me, but I cannot remix something like this. It sounds like it's a font speaker like this, but that was the whole identity of that record. That was how Green Velvet defined itself at that very moment. I just had no experience with a sound like it.
A bad little kid doing bad little things. He is sucking on a balloon. Now, this is not an ordinary balloon, parents. It's a balloon filled with a gas called...
So this was the vocal that I got, and you can hear that it's really different from most songs. It was more like a little perk and a little detail in the record, and it was not about the vocals like most songs were. So if I play you the project.
When you know it, not here more than 30 seconds and already I see a bad little kid doing...
Only a very few things going on here, and this is one of the things that I really used a lot in those records. There was a synth called Synthplant, and if I open it, it looks like a little seed, and if you want to change the sound, you have to pull on the strings of the seed. So random, but back then it was really the only way to get creative, was this sound. As interesting as it sounds, this was really an instrument that I used in every record. And if I would go to the drop, you might recognize that it's there. Every little time that I, made a record, this sound was in the back.
Campus ready, prepare to fly.
Well, here you go. It's maybe such a small detail, but it was such an important part of the record. And I remember a lot of DJs ask me, how did you do the snares in this record? That was another thing. I used to play in a marching band as a drummer. A lot of pictures are available on the internet if you want to laugh, have a good time. But it was me with special occasions in Holland, marching in a band playing single drums. And then after that evolved into drums on a drum set. But it was really about the snare drums back then also, and the rhythm of it that, kind of gave character to my records, I feel. And let's go to those snare drums a little bit. it sounds like this, and it sounds really dull if I play it like this, probably. Gotta switch it. This is basically all that happens. It's 3 layers of snares, and if I play them solo, well, it's really nothing. And then the trick of this record is the sidechain, and that's funny because I just spoke about it. Next to the kick drum, sidechain was so important, and this was one of the first moments where the sidechain made the difference in the record. If you listen to this part without the sidechain, it kind of sounds terrible because there's too much reverb. But the trick was to not only sidechain, and this is really maybe geek talk. I can imagine that you're watching like, okay, what is this? This is all like terms that we use in our music production. Sidechain is basically ducking a sound when the kick drum is playing. And you will definitely tell the difference now. I'm sure you can hear the difference if I play it with sidechain. It's going to sound like this. So what happens, the sidechain just comes up every time it has space and that the kick drum is not playing. Let's play it with the kick drum. So it basically sucks in the snare drums, and that was the first moment I realized sidechain is a big thing, rhythm is a big thing, and the kick drum is a big thing. Now this is the kick drum I use on all the records. I just saw it was named Kick November 2010. Let's stand still with the moment that's like 10 years ago. And it still works. So you get inspired when you start by the bigger names. You're like, oh, I want to make a record like Tiesto, like Guetta, maybe like Armin, maybe like you name it, Carl Cox. And then you do that, and then certainly after a while you start to to progress, and you're on a level where you're on the same stage as those huge names. And then suddenly you get inspired again by a young guy that came after you, and you take that and then you evolve from that and you grow into a new sound again because someone else younger than you brought a new idea up that inspires you again, like, oh wow, this is the sound that I want to make. And then it motivates you to go to a new sound. And then, for example, this is an idea that I'm working on now. So you can tell by the kick drum, probably, hopefully, that still it has a Nicky Romero sounding feel to it. And I'll play you the kick drum again. Again, it's changed. Again, but still it has the signature, the punchiness, and the sidechain that you're used to probably of mine. The sidechain now works a little different than back in the days, because now we have our own. We developed our own plugin called Kickstart that we use because it's really simple and easy to use. But the fundament is the same, and the sound also reminds me of 2014, but then progressed and defined in a new way. When I started out my first shows, I felt like I was used to play real instruments. That was what I was really confident with. And I was only focused on my instruments, so only the drums. When you start DJing, it's not the gear that matters. It's the people that matter. And that's a process that I had to go through from the beginning, because suddenly I had to focus on if the crowd was having a good time instead of if I was doing my mixes right. And that's the big trick behind DJing. A lot of people think you have to be amazing on the decks. And of course, that's what matters. But what matters even more is that the people that you're playing for have a good time. And eventually that everybody has a good time. So in 2008-9, I started playing my first shows where I was really looking down at the mixer, having my technical side on lockdown. And then eventually, if you look at performances I've done later, Tomorrowland, Ultra, Airbeat 1, EDC, just to name a few, Mysteryland, Dance Valley, Sensation, they were all major big shows that gave me the opportunity to learn about playing in front of big audiences. And then all the knowledge you gain from playing smaller shows, you can apply to really focus on the crowd. Because eventually, if the crowd is having a good time, the gig is going well, and then you feel confident, and you're like, it feels amazing. And then it's not about the technical side. The technical side needs to be automatic. It's like the football player Messi or Ronaldo having to think about its footsteps instead of where the ball needs to go or where the team players are. I think that is a really good example of how it goes with DJing. So my first few shows was all about getting the tactics and the technical side right, but not so much about the crowd. And if you evolve and you gain experience, you learn it's all about the crowd, and that's all that matters.